You know, as I was preparing for this morning, actually as I've been preparing, God's really been kind of leaning on my heart here lately. And for some reason I keep going back to the life of Moses. And at first I didn't know why. I didn't know everything. It seemed like I studied everything that just kept, everything I read, every book I read, every passage I read, things just kept going back to Moses. And I thought, you know, maybe it's time for me to go back in and re-look at the life of Moses. To see what God has to teach us and to show us about the life of Moses. Now, I say that means, you know, and as I was reading through Moses, there's a lot of things I could relate to in Moses' life. There's a lot of things that I could relate to. You see, I was not, and I've shared some of this with you guys before, I was not a very vocal or aggressive child. I was a very shy child that kind of sat off in the corner, didn't say much.
You gotta be kidding.
I know, it's me not saying much. My whole family joked for years. They said, what happened? We would love to go back to those years because now we can't get him to shut up.
Amen.
Can we go back a few years?
Everybody says that.
But I was, like I said, but even that, not even being very vocal, I was not very aggressive. I was one of those kids, I pretty much, anybody just ran over me. I just let them just plow right over me. I just went along with the flow. And I was this way even into my teenage years. Once I kind of started to hit my teenage years, I kind of started coming out of my shell a little bit. I kind of started coming into my own. Some of that was it was kind of like you have to fight to survive. But I kind of came out of that shyness that I had. And I slowly started to move out of that. Especially, I really kind of hit it around my early 20s. And part of that was I got into business, I was working, and I got very aggressive when it came to business. But on the flip side, not only was I very aggressive, I wasn't a very nice person. And I'm just going to admit that to you this morning. I went through a period in my life when I was not a nice person. I was that person, I shared with before, I worked in printing. Managed a print shop for years, and then went on to own my own for quite a few years. But while I was there, I was that person. I could chew a copier service person's rear end faster than you can imagine. I could rip them up one side and right down the other. I could do it on the phone, I could do it in person. Like I said, I could get hold of salespeople on the phone for different vendors. I was just not a very nice person. What used to be that very shy, tender individual had now turned into a very aggressive, nasty individual. But my problem was, I carried that in every aspect of my life. I was what you would call a hothead. I literally would pop off at the slightest little thing, and I got so stinking mad, and I would let everybody know it. I didn't care where I was at, what I was doing. I carried that at home to my wife and my kids at the same time. I could just set off like that. But something happened when I pretty much right around the time that I hit 30 years of age. God opened up the door for us to leave the business that I had managed and open up our own business. And it was God. Because it was only God that could have put this in place, that could have put the things in the motion and have fit all the pieces together for it. And so God allowed us to open up this business. His fingerprints were all over it. But this is the beginning of a moment for me. This is the beginning of down a path to where I am now. God started doing a work in my life. I'm going to tell you guys, the things that used to come out of my mouth when I managed that one print shop were not very godly things. I said things that I wish I could go back in my life and take back. Boy, do I regret them. It was amazing. The moment that God did this work in my life, all that ceased. It just quit. And, you know, I wish I could tell you that when that happened, that everything was great. That everything in our lives was great, that God did this great work, and we lived happily ever after. That was kind of like the end of the story tale. But it wasn't. we went through some very dark times after that. One of them was when I left the shop. When I left my previous job, I was opening up another business just like where I had left from, the next town over. Obviously, a lot of shady things could have actually happened and occurred. I could have done that in a very ungodly way. I could have left this business, not notified my boss, had everything set up, stayed in the same town, opened up right next door. I did not have a non-competency clause. There was nothing legally stopping me from doing anything that I wanted to do. I could have opened up right next door, and I could have taken every one of his customers with me, cut and slashed his prices, and ran him out of business in a year. Could have done it. But I was like, God has opened up these doors. I'm going to do things the godly way. And so I actually told him what I was doing. I gave him my 2-week notice. Said, hey, by the way, I'm giving you my 2-week notice. A month from now, I'm going to be opening my own business next town over, not the same town, next town over. And on top of it, I'm not going to call on any of your customers for 6 months. I'm going to give you 6 months to get me leaving, to get yourself resettled, and to get the business taken care of before I leave, before I even step foot back in this town and start hitting on calling any of your customers. And then even when I didn't do it. I sent my sales girl out to do it. I didn't do it. It wasn't my face, it wasn't my name. They didn't know who it was. Needless to say, that didn't matter. The darkness followed. One Saturday morning, I'm standing in the front lobby of our business. My old boss walks in. Needless to say, he wasn't very happy. He lost a lot of business. Was not happy at all. This was business I had solicited. It was business that naturally came on its own. But he didn't like that, as you can imagine. And so he sat there, and you could just tell he was shaking when he walked in. And he was one of those individuals that when he was scared about something, when he was scared of the unknown, he was a very paranoid individual. But when he was scared, when he didn't know what was coming, he lashed out. You back him up into a corner, and he's going to lash out. Most of us, when you back us up in a corner, are going to lash out. But he put himself in this corner. It wasn't me. It was the way he'd been doing business that put him in the back, in this corner. I was unfortunately the focus of this. I was the target of this. And he starts rummaging. I basically stood there as he rummaged through my shop, shoving and pushing me around, trying to get me to punch him, trying to get me to fight back. And the entire time, this individual that not a year earlier would have popped off at him. And you got to remember, I was half his age. I could have cleaned his clock if I wanted to. But I stood there, and I literally just stood there like this. He came up, shoving me, pushing me, just kept pushing me. Actually, finally, he pushed me up against the wall. Didn't have anywhere to go. And he got so mad. He wanted a response out of me. That was what he wanted, was a response. At the time, I didn't realize that's what he wanted. But that's what he wanted. He wanted me to lash out in anger. He wanted me to be that hothead that I used to be. And then after he finally got done, reaches in his pocket, lays down a tape recorder. He'd been taping every word, every bit of the conversation. And then just within just a month or so after that, we got legal charges pressed against us because he was trying to say that we'd stolen from him. And it was a bogus charge. But I met with a lawyer, and we just simply in our statement filled out, I said, I have not taken anything from his business. I've not used anything of his in the course of doing business. And that was all my statement said. And that was what was sent out to the county prosecutor in order to find out whether or not they were actually going to file charges against us. Our lawyer ended up telling us, he says, he did all of that because he wanted you to fill out a report. he was going to get as much information as he could and then file a civil suit against you. He knew there was no legal ramifications. There was no criminal repercussions that he could press against you. But he was trying to get you to react. He was trying to get that information from you so then he could sit there and tear it apart and use it for a lawsuit against you. And he didn't get it. I look back at it and I go, man, was God looking out for me? If I had acted the way that I had acted a year earlier, it would have sunk me. But because of that work that God did in my life, it completely and totally changed things. And you know, and here's the thing, and as I sat there and I started thinking about this, I went, I wonder how many of us have experienced those moments in our lives where we just kind of seem to get blindsided by somebody or something. Somebody that was angry at us, somebody that was jealous of us. Maybe they were just scared. But they just kind of seem to come after us and just blindside us. It happens in the world all the time around us. And the facts are, a lot of times, most hatred in this world it's all based on the fact that it's fear of the unknown. I mean, most people will tell you that, like racism, a lot of times racism is nothing but based on the fact that it's the unknown. That it's a culture that's unknown to us. And because of that fear, it lashes out in anger. And so this morning, we're going to be looking at Exodus chapter 1. And I share this story with you guys because I'm going to read, like I said, I want to read through this. And I want you guys to right off the bat just be thinking about the situation of what's going on here with the Israelites. Joseph, the time of Joseph is past. His family, you know, when Joseph was sold into slavery, went into Egypt, they had the famine. When Joseph reunited with his family, he brought his entire family with him to Egypt. And they resided in Egypt. And so now, we're picking up where that's left off at. It says, these are the names of the sons of Israel, that is Jacob, who moved to Egypt with their father, each of his family. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. In all, Jacob had 70 descendants in Egypt, including Joseph, who was already there. In time, Joseph and all his brothers died, ending that entire generation. But their descendants, the Israelites, had many children and grandchildren. In fact, they multiplied so greatly that they became extremely powerful and filled the land. Eventually, a new king came to power in Egypt, who knew nothing about Joseph or what he had done. He said to his people, look, the people of Israel now outnumber us and are stronger than we are. We must make a plan to keep them from growing even more. If we don't, and if war breaks out, they will join our enemies and fight against us. Then they will escape from the country. So the Egyptians made the Israelites their slaves. They appointed brutal slave drivers over them, hoping to wear them down with crushing labor. They forced them to build their cities of Pithom and Ramses as supply centers for the king. But the more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more the Israelites multiplied and spread, and the more alarmed the Egyptians became. So the Egyptians worked the people of Israel without mercy. They made their lives bitter, forcing them to mix mortar and make bricks and do all the work in the fields. They were ruthless in all their demands. Then Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, gave this order to the Hebrew midwives. Shiphrah and, I'm going to say, Hua. When they held the Hebrew women as they gave birth, watch as they deliver. If the baby is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live. But because the midwives feared God, they refused to obey the king's orders. They allowed the boys to live too. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives. Why have you done this? He demanded. Why have you allowed the boys to live? The Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, the midwives replied. They are more vigorous and have their babies so quickly that we cannot get there in time. So God was good to the midwives, and the Israelites continued to multiply, growing more and more powerful. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people: throw every newborn Hebrew boy into the Nile River, but you may let the girls live. We live in a world that's very similar to the world that's going on right there. We live in a world that is very frightened and jealous. In fact, we're living in a world that is capitalizing on that fear right now. They want to make us afraid of something, but they also, and so they want us to say, be afraid of that and blame them. Because when they get to do that, it gives them power. What this does is this raises those individuals up in power. It puts them up at a higher stance where they can sit there and make everybody afraid of this, and by blaming these people, they're getting everybody fighting amongst themselves, and they start to raise up above everybody else. And we are living in a world right now where that's happening across the board right now.
Yes.
If you want to know who to blame for your crummy life, blame them.
Yeah.
Blame him, blame her, blame them.
Yeah.
Blame this country, blame this party, blame this state, blame this organization. It's the blame game right now.
Yeah.
And it's trying to get everybody as afraid as they possibly can of these different things. Now, we all know that our job as Christians is to go out into this world and share the gospel, right? We know that is our job. We spent this entire last series that we went through was kind of really focused on aspects of that, about going out and reaching people and bringing them back in and discipling them. But the thing is as we know, or we need to know, what can happen when we do. What's going to happen when we go out into this world and we start to share the gospel with people? We need to be prepared for it. We're going to go out to the world that doesn't understand what we do. They're not going to understand who we worship. They're not going to understand why we do the things that we do. It's unknown to them. They don't understand it. And what's going to happen sometimes when we go out and that unknown? Fear. Anger. Fear of the unknown. Because they don't know God like we do. They don't know what it means to be a follower of Christ. Anger, hatred, confusion, everything. All those things happen when someone doesn't understand. They feel that something is being threatened that is dear to them, and they don't know what will happen if it's taken from them or they have to give it up. A lot of people know what we as Christians stand for and believe in. And they realize this is going to be a sacrifice. We all realize, we all know we've had a relationship with God. We know there are sacrifices that come along the way. But we also know that the blessings and the rewards that come from that sacrifice and that obedience more than outweigh what we give up and what we sacrifice. But the world doesn't see that. They don't understand those blessings. They don't understand those things yet because it's unknown to them. It doesn't make sense. So sometimes it's not God that they hate, or even what we're preaching, or sharing, or teaching. It's not Christianity that they hate. Because let's face the facts. How can you hate love? I mean, that's what we stand for, right? Love. God's love for us. Our love for God. Everything we do is built on love. Everything God has done was built on love. How can you hate that? But it's the unknown that they hate, that they're scared of. Let's face it, we could see ourselves personally being run through the mud, we could see ourselves being attacked. So how do we combat, how do we deal with this? And as we went through this book, of this story of Moses, and we're gonna start walking through the life of Moses. We see here all of a sudden Pharaoh is threatened. He's threatened by something that he doesn't understand. Pharaoh was frightened about God's favor for his people. He was frightened about the unknown, and he's probably a little jealous at the same time. And here's the thing, this Pharaoh did not understand. To put this into context, the Pharaoh, if historians are correct on everything that they share at this point in time, what would have happened in this time of history is the Pharaoh that was in charge when Moses was there, when Joseph was there, there was a changeover in leadership in Egypt. A new dynasty came into play. When this new dynasty came into play, they would have exiled all of the old leadership. All of the Pharaoh, all of his old Pharaoh, all of his family, everything. They would have either killed them or exiled them out of Egypt. And they would have now assumed power. So the people that were now in power had no knowledge of what happened with Joseph or his God. So for this Pharaoh, it was completely unknown. He didn't get these Israelites. He didn't get the God that they worshipped because he had no history with them. This wasn't like the Pharaoh and his family that had passed down through Joseph and his family, and all of a sudden Pharaoh decided to turn. This was a new line. This was a new dynasty. And let's face it, Israel did not have warlike intentions. They didn't have plans of domination or rule in their mind. They just wanted to live their lives. They wanted to love their families, and they wanted to worship their God. Does it sound familiar? How many of us today want to just live our lives, love our families, and worship our God? Now, mind you, part of worshiping our God is sharing the gospel. The church doesn't have to provoke anything. Just by us being who we are opens ourselves up for attack. Because it is amazing what an evil and carnal heart can read into the intentions of other men and women. Let me say that again. It is amazing what an evil and carnal heart can read into the intentions of other men and women. And we have to remember that all hearts that have not been reconciled with God are evil and carnal. They don't realize it, but they are. You take this misunderstanding or lack of godly wisdom that has been turned into aggression, hatred, etc., and then you mix in some worldly wisdom, and you get some really nasty results. You see, the worldly wisdom also devises and results in some very cruel methods. That can be seen here by Pharaoh. He was using worldly methods in order to try to solve his problem. And look at the results of it. They were very cruel. Difference breeds fear if left up to our natural, earthly, sinful selves. History has proven that time and time and time again. And I said, so Pharaoh was trying to combat this. His thought was, and this is common within this time period, I want to make the Israelites like us. They went in, they conquered somebody, and then they assimilated them. They made them just like who they were. He wanted to assimilate them instead of embrace the beauty, the strength, the advantage, and the individualism that they had. Now, I'm going to be honest, some of the Israelites, they would have turned. And they began living and following everything just like the Egyptians did. But most of the Israelites did not become like the Egyptians. But you know what's amazing is I think under a lot of worldly normal circumstances, it would have worked. Pharaoh driving those people would have worked if it hadn't been for God looking out for him. If it hadn't been for God looking out for his people.
Amen.
As long as his people stayed focused on him, God helped protect them from becoming the ungodly people that they lived among. So what Pharaoh could not understand or change, he decided to control. He enslaved the Israelites in order to control what he feared. Because if you can control it, you're a little less scared of it. His worldly wisdom and guidance allowed some cruel methods to occur in his slavery. The bondage that the Israelites incurred was as cruel as man could make it. This was just short of death. If you want to think about the worst human conditions, that was what Pharaoh was putting forward on the Israelites right now. We even see where he tried to kill the sons of the Israelites as they were born. Even to the point where he's having them thrown into the river, which is obviously where we begin and see the beginning that carries over to the beginning of the life of Moses. So we see all these things, we understand, but we understand what can happen to man in a world where they fear something they don't understand. But what can we do and learn from it? I think there's four things. First is, when God intervenes, men's evil designs cannot succeed. When God intervenes. There's a reversal of natural law. See, God counteracted the tyrannical powers. Everything that should have worked with another group of people in this day and time would have worked if God hadn't been involved in it. But God was. He intervened. Deliverance may not have come at that moment, but he gave them vigor and strength. They were living beyond these conditions that most people would have died in. And he was probably, to a certain degree, you just imagine how this was probably blowing Pharaoh's mind. How are they still doing this? How are they still multiplying? Why are they not breaking? It's because God was giving them a strength like no other. You see, Pharaoh may also have been, sometimes the Pharaoh or the enemy may win the battle, but they don't win the war. Because let's face it, the babies were still sacrificed. There was still hurt and there was still pain. There was bloodshed in Egypt. But in the end, God won, right?
Amen.
God won. Moses came through God, and Moses, he freed his people, led them out of Egypt.
Yeah.
So at that moment, when all seemed lost, when all seemed as gloomy as what it could possibly be, God was still at work. He was giving them a strength. He was protecting them. Even when they might not have realized. Could you imagine the mothers crying out for their sons that are being thrown in the river? But I also wonder when they look back at the end, as they were leaving Egypt, and they looked and saw all of that behind them. Makes you wonder, did they sit there and connect it all together and realize God really was faithful? God really did intervene for us. May not have seemed like it at the moment, but he was at work. Second thing is God influences. He is not influenced, he influences. The midwives feared God because Israelite influence had been effective. The life of the Israelites had rubbed off on these midwives. The nature of God, I think, had rubbed off on these midwives. And that was one of the reasons why they did not kill those children when they were born. Some of the instances, yes, was they just had the children before they got there. But that was also, it says that, but that was also an easy kind of excuse. They were able to say that and get away with it and not be killed. So God was even looking out for the midwives. And then third, faith in God enables men to give a reason for not doing wrong. The Israelites could have reacted in a very bad way. Think about it. Think about the situations that they were in. They were being pushed. They were no different than me standing in the middle of that shop, having someone pushing and shoving me, trying to rile me up. And they could have reacted in a very bad way. They could have rebelled. They could have fought back. They could have tried to fled. There's multiple different scenarios and situations of what the Israelites could have tried to do. But they didn't. They didn't act badly during any of it. They held their heads high, and they acted in a godly way. Because when men fight against God, they ultimately come to desperation. And they were following God's will. They were being obedient. They were being patient as they were waiting for God to fulfill and do the work that He was working. God was working on this. He had a plan. Because the fourth thing is when God is involved, we will survive. If God had not been involved, the people would have also... Because here's another part of this. When Pharaoh came in and he took this big group of people, one of the first things he would have done is he would have broke them up, and he scattered the Israelites all over Egypt. Instead of them being this big group, he spread them all over the place. They're less of a threat with the smaller numbers. Get them in smaller numbers, if a rebellion was to occur, it'd be easy to pick them off. Versus when they were this large mass. And so the Israelites were technically more vulnerable than they could have ever been. Pharaoh technically, if you were to look at probably military laws and military strategy, and you were to look at all those things, Pharaoh did everything that he should have done and could have done to have conquered those people, to have broke them, to have eliminated them, to have eliminated his fear and his threat. But God was involved. And it was only by God that they survived. How often do we allow ourselves to do things without God's involvement? I can handle this, I can handle that, I don't need God. Or maybe we just go, I'm tired of being patient. I want to do it now, I'm tired of this. Tired of the hurt. Imagine what the Israelites were going through and the hurt that they were experiencing. But they stayed faithful to God. God wasn't telling them to run and flee yet. They were waiting for God's involvement. Because let's face it, that's what it took. We fast forward in the story a little bit, and we see that it was only by an act of God that they would have been able to leave. And that's what, think about the extreme circumstances and the extreme acts of God that it took to break those people free without killing half of them. They may have been able to free themselves. Maybe they could have. Maybe they could have rebelled. Maybe they could have took up arms, fought the Egyptians and survived. But at what cost? How many would have died? How many would have lost? Yes, they suffered losses while they were under Pharaoh. But how many more losses would they have experienced if they hadn't been obedient to God? You see, a lot of times we react in unrighteous anger. And there is a difference between righteous and unrighteous anger. Most of the time, we react in unrighteous anger. We allow it to consume us. We have a right to be angry. The Egyptians had a right to be upset, to be angry. Think what they were going through. But they didn't allow it to consume them to where they acted in an unrighteous anger. How we react to these situations and circumstances is so important. We may not cause the actions that are coming our way. Like I said, sometimes maybe it's just us being a believer. Us being Christ-like. Just us, our very presence. But we do have control in how we act afterwards and how we allow it to influence our relationship with God. It's one of those things, have you stayed the course? There's I love this movie. A little bloody at spots, but I love The Patriot with Mel Gibson. Love that movie. And that's one of the things that they keep saying over and over and over again through it is stay the course. Stay the course. Because if you remember all the way along through this, is you have these patriots that are fighting, Mel Gibson and his son and their little band, and they're fighting against the Redcoats. And what did they were losing. And the Redcoats didn't like that. So what did they do? For those that have seen this movie, they went after what was most near and dear to them. They found their families, they found their farms, and they started killing and slaughtering them. Because they wanted them to react in anger, in unrighteous anger. And every time that they did, something bad happened. And then once where the son newly gets married, the Redcoats come in and they end up killing the entire village, including the new wife. They put everybody in the church, bar up the church, and burn the church to the ground. And this son goes out for revenge. Unrighteous anger. And what ends up happening? Him and all of his men that he took with him die. Because they didn't stay the course. They deviated from what they were supposed to do. How many times in our lives do we deviate from the course that God has in front of us? Because of things that people start throwing at us, yelling at us, trying to deviate us from where we're supposed to be at. Disaster happens when we don't stay the course. When we don't keep faith and obedience. Like I said, could you imagine what would have happened to the Israelites if they'd taken things into their own hands? We can't allow these things to deter us from doing what we're supposed to do, spreading the gospel. God will protect us and be there for us no matter what. Even in the shadows, even in the valley, God's with us.
Amen.
Don't allow the anger or hatred of the unknown ruin your testimony or distract you from the mission. Dear Heavenly Father, as we come before you this morning, Lord, I don't know who you have this message for this morning, when we're going to need it. Lord, I know that just odds tell us that sooner or later, one of us is going to find ourselves in a situation where we are falsely attacked just because of who we are, maybe because we're a Christian, maybe because we're a woman, or a child, or white, or black, or Hispanic. Who knows what the situations are? Just for us being who we are, who you created us to be, we find ourselves under attack. But Lord, may we stay faithful to who you made us to be. May we use this example of the Israelites to give us a fresh strength and renewal in what it means to be a follower of you. To pour our lives out to you, to know that you have our back, to know that you are involved, and that you do have a plan if we stay obedient and focused on you. There may be hurt, there may be pain in our lives from time to time. Lord, you can use even that for your good. So may we be able to sometimes see beyond just the momentary hurt, the momentary pain that we have, and to see you, to see the bigger picture of what you have for our lives. Lord, we just open ourselves up. May we stay obedient. May we stay the course this morning. May we not fall to temptation of the unknown and allow that hatred and anger to consume us or affect us. Lord, we love you. Be with us as we go from this place. May we feel your presence throughout the remainder of this week, Lord. In your name, amen. You are dismissed.
What will I can see?
We can go.